righty. I've already fired it up, so we're good to go.
Oh, is this recording the whole time?
Yeah, baby.
Okay. Well, welcome back. It is the much anticipated episode 2 of Real Estate Roundtable. Is that right, Josh?
I think so. Yeah, that's the most
Second time we've done
second
this.
time. Yeah, we've had
Yeah.
all four of us. Yeah.
Yeah. Had our panelists, expert panelists. So for those who didn't watch it, we did it at like the beginning of the year. So a lot has changed since then.
A little bit.
So what we like to do with this, it's a little more serious than our usual conversations. As people may know, Josh and I are realtors in our day jobs, so a little more of the residential side of things. And then we like to bring in some friends from the commercial side of business, a little bit of a different perspective. So today we have Andrew from who was on the last Real Estate Roundtable. Andrew, want to say hi, introduce yourself.
Sure. So I think last time I gave a serious intro. So this time I'm going to give the intro they asked. So I think I funded $1 gajillion worth of loans this year.
Nice. Solid.
And I run 5,000 different investment properties.
Nice.
That's my level of expertise.
Perfect.
It is off the charts. And joining us today, Brandon Imada. Thank you for joining us, man. We appreciate you jumping on with us. You want to say hello?
Yeah, so I work at Avison Young. My name is Brandon. I'm a senior associate in the multifamily investment sector. And I've sold, I don't even know actually, never really kept tally, but a few $1 million worth of apartment properties and development sites and land sites in the Edmonton area and Alberta region for the last 4.5 years since I've been in the business.
Nice, man.
Yeah.
Beauty. So what's everyone's overarching feelings here? Is it going to be the end of the world in the market? Is it going to be partying in the streets? What are we looking at going forward here?
I hope it's the latter. That sounds fun.
Sounds like a better time.
Yeah. I think it's been more of a recovery period as of recent. I think when COVID hit, everything kind of just shut down, especially on my side of things. And I'd say my sector of real estate has been a bit busier than most of others, excluding residential real estate.
Mm-hmm.
So the multifamily side has been pretty active, just given the type of tenants that we have in our business, and that it is more cyclical. But that being said, the turnover is just more of a regular part of our business, and so it's been looking up. And I think a lot of the investment side of things, people are not looking as closely at retail and office investments, industrial investments for obvious reasons. So they've since switched to focusing more on multifamily and to diversify their portfolios, and it's shown in the transactions, it's shown in our sales. So I think things are looking up. I think things are looking a little bit better for sure. Pending a second lockdown here, I think we're going to make it out all right, hopefully.
I like to hear that. For us on the resi side, like we've been active. It's been pretty active, man. Like people just keep coming in and buying houses, and specifically on the building and reno side of things too. It's, from what I've heard, it's very difficult to get material right now.
For sure. Yeah, I heard lumber costs have gone up significantly. I used to work at Trail Building Supplies, so like a lumber supplier back in the day.
Nice.
And I reckon things are a lot different though now. So I don't know what the costs of how much it's gone up. I heard like anywhere from 10 to 20% it's increased for certain types of lumber. And so, yeah, you can imagine, I guess margins are a lot tighter for guys out there. But I guess on your guys' side, the residential side, what kind of product is moving the most that you're noticing out there?
Go ahead, Josh.
Okay. Well, what I'm seeing is pretty much everything in that sub 450, 500. That's where things are just going.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
I was out in St. Albert doing a deal. This was a couple months back, but every single property we wanted to see was pending within like 2 days. And that was your sub 450 out in St. Albert, which is, I mean, for St. Albert, that's a very low price bracket to get in. But yeah, everything was just moving. Generally, I think things have slowed down just a little bit into, November. Once the snow hits, everything seems to kind of take a backseat for a lot of people, but we're also seeing a lot of other transactions happen in the resi side too.
Wow. That's good. Yeah, no, actually, well, a lot of our clients are actually a lot of merchant home builders in Edmonton, even land sales. Actually, I was having a drink with somebody last week from Melcor, and they
Sure.
mentioned that literally all of their subdivisions are selling out. Like they can't keep product on the shelves, whereas maybe a year prior they had too much, way too much on the shelves. They had so much product on hand still, and I don't know if it's a factor of potential. I guess maybe Andrew could speak to this a bit more, but the low interest rates, some attractive debt options out there. I'm sure that's driving part of the market, but that's a bit strange. I don't know. Maybe there's a lot of people that didn't have the opportunity to purchase in the last few months during the lockdown, and now they're kind of coming back in the market in conjunction with who was already going to buy in this time anyways. Maybe that's a bit of the influx of purchases and trades that are happening. But yeah, it's a bit interesting.
Yeah, I'll let you touch on that, Andrew.
I think it's a combination of a lot of things. So interest rates do help, especially the fact that you can probably lock in like a 2.2, 2.3, maybe even 2.1. I mean, for 5 years, they've got to go up at some point. So that's a pretty good deal. I think, and one of the articles kind of alluded to it, you're seeing a lot of people who probably put off buying, who lived either downtown or in condos and who rented, use this as an opportunity to buy. The one article specified that a lot of the changes they're seeing in, I think it's the GTA area, the rents for I think it was a 3-bedroom apartment decreased, but the average price for a 3-bedroom like townhouse actually increased. So that is probably driving some of the people who, were paying, let's say $1,500, $1,600, $1,800 a month, $2,000 a month for a condo, going, well, hey, like I can get a house for less than that and a yard, which is a way better option than my 1,100 square foot condo downtown. I don't have to be close to work anymore, because the likelihood of my job going back to being downtown is either low or 2 or 3 days a week kind of thing, I think is probably driving it. And then you have the combination of, the lockdown hit March, April, and you had some, I would say, pent up demand too, right? Where I think they said they saw like no homes sold in March in Edmonton or something, like something ridiculous like that, right? So you have, a combination of a lot of factors that drove just a ton of sales in the Edmonton area. And I mean, like, let's be real. If you are married or live with your girlfriend or boyfriend, and you both make decent money, like you're going to easily be able to afford, $350,000, $450,000, $500,000 home, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is just the time to buy. The market is good, and everybody is saying, you got to buy now, you got to buy now, you got to buy now, right? So you got that psychological effect coming in and going, oh, maybe I should buy, maybe I should buy.
I wonder how much of that is maybe driven by potentially a lot of the sellers. Maybe they're in a bit of financial distress, and on the merchant home builder side, they'd be taking costs for a lot of these properties prior, but now that there's actually a market, I mean, they're just well priced and better priced than ever before, and so maybe there's a bit more motivation on the other end that's really driving that bus as well, and it's really fed into a lot of the demand for these products.
Are you saying...
Go ahead,
Andrew.
Oh, I would be really curious, because there was a lot of home builders, mid 2019, late 2019, throughout the year that were really struggling. I'd be really curious to know at the end of the year if this has actually saved a lot of them from either serious financial trouble or insolvency, just because they've been able to just sell product after product. And if that's going to save a lot of the home builders in Alberta that were facing some pretty dire financial positions.
Yeah, I was going to say that there's seemingly a push to suburban areas. Like there's a little bit of a movement from, the downtown core to, like you were saying, the merchant home builders are doing their subdivisions, out in Chappelle or west of Edmonton. So there's that movement outside of the downtown core, which is interesting to me, which also, I guess my question for you, Brandon, is what's driving the demand for multifam? Is it just because there's really the investment side of like for office space, it just doesn't look as attractive as multifamily does right now?
Yeah, I'd say there's a lot more, I guess, a bleaker future for a lot of the other asset classes out there. Like when you're looking at industrial, you really got to look for unique businesses to take your spaces. I mean, I can't speak too much to it. I don't work in that side of things that often, but or at all for that matter. But I do know that, you know, unless you are looking to use that use that space as a user owner, or potentially throw in a unique type of tenant in there, and the same goes for office space as well. I mean, look at all these businesses that people are working from home. They've realized they don't need the office space anymore. You know, a great example is actually my father. He works at Worley Parsons, and they've closed all their offices, and they took up a significant amount of space just north of Whitemud there. And so they're all working from home now, and they've laid off a ton of people in conjunction with that. And that's one of many companies. And so when you're looking at that, I mean, there's not a whole lot of opportunities there for people to fill that same type of space. And so when you look at the projection of where that type of investment's going, I mean, yeah, people don't know. There's a lot of questions that fly around. Whereas in multifamily, you have a bit more of a, I guess, a needed space, right? People are always going to need to find a place to live. And it's a bit more of a, I guess, attractive asset class as of recent. I think when I was getting in the business, it was just starting to take off. And only over the last few years, we've started seeing a lot of interest on the investment side from out east. So guys out of Toronto, even guys from BC, large REITs, institutional investors are now taking a look at Edmonton because they've been priced out of their own markets. The yields are not very good in Toronto and Vancouver. And so they're looking at Edmonton as a very viable option. I mean, where else do you go outside of Vancouver and Toronto? Well, you're going to look at Calgary and Edmonton. So Alberta has been a place that's been receiving incredible demand in multifamily over the last little bit here. And I think that's taken away a lot of the interest from these types of investors. A lot of investors were previously very invested into obviously office and retail, but they didn't really own much multifamily. So they're seeing that as a bit of a safe haven asset class, I guess, as you would say. And as long as you run good properties, you have good management in it, and you're well located, you know, a lot of things that need a lot of work and potentially, you know, are major factors in your decision making. Yeah, you're able to receive good returns on these types of properties. And only recently as well, Edmonton has started developing these types of higher quality asset classes for multifamily specifically. So we never had rental towers 5 years ago, not even 3 years ago, maybe. Yeah. Right? We never had suburban rental products. They were all condos, right? So now we're seeing a lot of this type of product, higher quality, well-located product in Edmonton. These are just never purchasing options for these types of buyers, right? So Edmonton has really grown into a good rental market, or at least you could say a stable rental market somewhat. And I think that's what's driven a lot of the demand.
Cool.
But that might be slowly changing now. I don't really know. I think a lot of the investors from out east now are kind of taking a back seat on Edmonton. We have noticed. So that's one of the major things that I've noticed this year as opposed to previous years, is that these institutions are they're a little too risk averse. They have bought large positions in Edmonton in the last couple of years here, even more than that, last 3-4 years. They picked up, probably a couple of them have picked up maybe even close to 1,000 units in Edmonton. And they've been invested here, I guess, in the last few years now, and it's been nothing but kind of fluctuating. And then now we have this. And so they're taking a bit of a back seat. But also in conjunction with that, I mean, there's great opportunities out in Toronto and Vancouver in their own respective markets. And so when, you know, I think in the article that you sent our way, Josh, and mentioned that vacancy was increasing slightly in places like Toronto, rental rates were declining. Right. And so, I mean, that leads to ultimately value, right? That's income. And so when the income's not there, you get better values in your own market. You might as well play in your own backyard, right? Where you're closer to, right? As comparative to Edmonton, where there is a bit more risk in our market, given that we are heavily attached to the oil side of things. And obviously with COVID, right? It's a double whammy that we're seeing here.
How much risk do you think that Edmonton has compared to Calgary, for example, because of the oil sector and all of that? Obviously, we're a little bit more insulated, being a little bit more of we're not like, we don't have the white collar offices, right? Totally. These major companies.
Yeah, we have a lot more of the government sector, I guess, right? And that's what's kind of keeping some things afloat. But on the opposite side, I do know that they're experiencing incredible vacancy because that's where a lot of the headquarters were located at some point in time for a lot of these oil companies.
Mm-hmm.
On the multifamily side, I think Edmonton is potentially a little bit more insulated in that the population that we have here, like you mentioned, it maybe is a bit more blue collar. And these are the types of tenants that live in existing apartment buildings that fill more affordable units. And because of that, you know, we have that stable rental base, whereas maybe in Calgary, you have a slightly higher income. You have slightly more white collar people that, you know, maybe can afford a house, right? They don't have to go and rent, right? They'd rather have ownership because they can do it. I mean, there certainly is a bit more of attractiveness living in a place like Calgary, for sure. But we have seen that the performance for rental properties here in Edmonton have been at least slightly better than what we see in Calgary. And I think that's kind of helped Edmonton. And we've seen ultimately more investment on the multifamily side here as well.
I can kind of speak to that. We did a statistics project in my MBA on housing prices in Edmonton. We tried to correlate interest rate, population increase, and price of oil, and I think one other one. And we found price of oil had no statistical correlation between the housing price in Edmonton.
Really?
It was almost entirely driven by population increases and interest rates. So I don't know if that would, like, how much of that would correlate over to like the multifamily, but that was sort of an interesting insight just in terms of Edmonton, how the price of oil had no bearing on price.
I also think that real estate is a lagging market though too, right? So go ahead, sorry.
I think we did 20 or 25 years of data.
Really?
Yeah. Because we thought about that and we figured it was with 20 or 25 years of data, we figured it'd be enough to either get around that or at least like show it in something.
That's really good to know, actually, because I know there was a recent article, I think it was like a couple of weeks ago, that came out that mentioned that there was going to be a push from the federal government to drive more immigrants into Canada. And they've mentioned something to the tune of 1.2 million, and that'll be 400,000 people at the tail end of each year. And if you think about the markets that these types of residents would go to, I mean, you're looking at Toronto, Vancouver, very unaffordable markets, even on the rental side. I mean, you could live in Saskatoon, but I feel like Edmonton has a bit more opportunity, or a place like that, right? So, you know, I think Calgary and Edmonton are going to be the hotspots for a lot of this population growth over the next couple of years here. I think they said they're going to start in 2021 here. So that's incredibly positive. And I mean, being on the multifamily end, just going to try to stick it out until that time, because I know that occupancy will be good, and that means sales. So.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Good takes. Glad you guys are here. Should we get into these articles here, Josh, that you sent us?
Yeah, let's do that.
Do you have them up in front of you?
I do. I actually also wanted to add one from literally 2 hours ago, and that is that Airbnb has actually filed for their IPO, which is, let's start with that one, because I think that one's kind of the most surprising of any of the articles we're going to talk about, specifically because of the year that they've had due to the pandemic and everything. And why is it now the time? So let's talk about that one to begin with.
Well, do you have a thought on that? Because I mean, you know, you're more the stock market guy.
Fair enough. My personal thought on it, just because how it relates to real estate, is that I wonder why now. Is it because they're trying to get people that are seeing obviously the long term of things and getting in now because of, is the price going to be cheaper? I don't know. It's kind of an interesting timing, to say the least. You said you had some thoughts on it, Andrew.
Yeah, like I feel like it could go one of two ways. So the first way being, you IPO now, you understand that you're probably not going to get a great price, because whoever's going to lead it is going to have to go to Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, and a bunch of these other institutional investors and pitch to them essentially a hospitality company or a hotel company, in effect, that is just going to take losses for, 12 months, 18 months is probably best case scenario. But then, once you climb out, you're going to get a really nice stock increase, right? Because you're going to be able to show really good changes in terms of profitability and revenue growth and whatnot. So that was the one side of my thinking. The other one was more on you got to pick a date. Typically, you've got to have these dates well in advance, so the sell side investors can go to market, right? So this could just be a timing thing where they've signed an agreement with whoever is going to essentially lead the IPO as an underwriter, and they've decided to go out and do it, and they're like, sorry, date's coming down. We've announced the IPO to get 6 to 12 months of investors looking at it, and then we'll go from there, right? That was sort of the two ideas I had.
Well, I think the interesting thing too is the last roundtable we did, we were talking about WeWork, I believe. So it's kind of an interesting timing that now we're talking about the other supposed unicorn. So, but yeah, they supposedly, at least over the last quarter, they showed there's profit in the last quarter, but they've had to do deep cuts. So it's interesting. We'll have to see how it goes. Any thoughts on that though, Brandon?
Yeah, actually, well, I don't really follow the equity markets too much, but
no.
I'm curious to see actually how it affects the rental industry though. I know in bigger markets like Toronto and Vancouver, there could be a lot of opportunity there. If there's increased vacancy in a lot of these places, who's going to fill the holes? And so I know a lot of guys are looking towards short-term rentals. That could be a way in for them into the multifamily side. And potentially they get a little bit, deeper into it and end up getting more on the short to mid-term rental side, which is a huge thing, at least we're seeing here in Edmonton. I do know, because a lot of guys it is harder to find renters, and a lot of people don't want to sign their typical year leases. They want to go for 3 to 6 month leases, and maybe that's a hotbed. It's a great area of the market for a place like Airbnb to attack. And any markets with excessive vacancy or more units, I think it's a good way to fill your units and at least get some income out of them. Although there's a lot of things that play into it, but I'm curious to see how that kind of coincides with my business.
Actually, I had one more thought just thinking about it. So you guys understand how venture capitalism works in terms of their return in their portfolios, right?
Yeah.
So essentially, Sequoia, it said has 16.4%. So they're going to say, okay, like we put $1 million in 10 years ago, we need a $200 million exit. So this also could just be the lead VC firms going, guys, whether or not we're going to get our valuation is inconsequential, because right now I've got to return money to my investors and I need cash. That could be an interesting play too. And they could just say, look, we understand we're not going to get the valuation or the return we were hoping for, but we've got enough that satisfies what we need to return year over year to our investors. Right. And we just got to cash out. Because when did Sequoia buy into Airbnb? Like what? At least 11, 12 years, maybe? Like 10, right? So they could be at the limit of that fund length in terms of what they've got to return.
That's an interesting thought too, in that they're kind of, and we had talked about it with WeWork, in that, you're almost pushing them out of the nest, so to speak, so that you can get your money back, right? And I mean, we're only going to make 200x instead of 400x or whatever. But yeah, I just think it's interesting timing, to say the least. That, or they have so much faith in this vaccine that's supposed to come out that maybe 6 months down the road from now, it's a completely different world. But okay. So that was the first article we wanted to talk about. The second article was the average Canadian house price continues to defy expectations. We're up 17% in the last year. So maybe Tom and I can speak a little bit more to that one, but September was the busiest month for home sales ever, which is insane to think about. So I'll let you start that one, Tommy.
Sure. I mean, yeah, it's kind of a weird phenomenon, and it's definitely, I would say, semi-artificial in that it was a lot of pent-up demand. But I also think it would be kind of, we touched on it earlier, where it's sort of a skewing towards more suburban, detached, single family sort of thing. So, because I know in Edmonton specifically, like probably the best and healthiest market is basically detached single family under 400K, right? Which generally it is, but it was exceptionally hopping this year versus like when you break it down to like condos and townhomes, it was kind of meh, right? So perhaps the data maybe here is skewing upwards because not so much that prices are increasing, but the price of property that transacted more was higher, if that makes sense.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
selling 10 200K condos or 10 400K condos, like it skews the price either way.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of my take on this. Because I can tell you anecdotally, like I have listings that I, relisted this year that are listed cheaper than last year. So it's kind of factually inaccurate to say prices increased 15% in Alberta or whatever, or it's 8.5% in Alberta here, but
yeah.
That's my 2 cents on it, at least.
I always laugh at the national averages because you have, again,
they make, what
no
does it say here?
609,000. Yeah, 604,000 is the average home price in Canada. Not in Alberta, I can tell you that.
All ballooned by the two sides of our country for sure.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, it's I don't know. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was curious to find out. I was curious to see. I guess because I know. I guess in the last year or so, we've been kind of mentioning this to our clients, and maybe one of the reasons why the multifamily side was so active as of recent is we did notice that the mortgage rules that were put in place, I guess in 2018, were they? They did make a bit of an impact on purchasing power. So people maybe weren't purchasing those homes way back when. I guess in the last couple of years. That in combination with the lower interest rates, with maybe a slight decline in housing prices, maybe in that range, has created a bit of demand for home sales. But we have noticed, actually, I mean, like we alluded to this throughout the podcast here, in that a lot more people are looking to go to the suburbs, and we're noticing that huge on the townhome rental side. So that's not something that's normally ever been on the rental side of things. It's mainly always been fee simple sales. But there's a couple owners out there, builders, that have built townhome projects. They're fully leased out, and they fully lease out in 6 to 8 months, right? So there's no problem filling these units. And previously, maybe these were something in that range of $253 to $350 a door. These things are renting out great, and so it is. I believe it maybe is a lifestyle choice. People with families, they don't want to go out and rent a condo or a 2-bedroom apartment. They want to go and live in a townhome. They want to live in the suburbs. They want to have that life, and now that they don't need to be downtown, it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, interesting. That's in Edmonton that they're doing that as well?
Edmonton, Edmonton, all in Edmonton. We've noticed a couple projects, mainly on the southeast. So maybe that's more of an area for it, like Summerside, you're talking Orchards, Walker, Aurora, those areas. But yeah, I mean, rental product for townhomes, or I guess more bedroom units at least.
Yeah, just a little more space, right? So probably not a huge incremental cost increase.
Exactly.
So
when you really think about it, a 2-bedroom condo, city centers, I don't know, I'm paying $1,800 a month. What are you paying for a townhouse out there where you get, like your full 3 bedrooms? You're getting probably 12 or 13.
Double garage.
Exactly, 1,300 square feet.
Depending where it is.
Yeah. Your rental is going to be, comparable. So, and I mean, if you have a family.
That's what I alluded to earlier, right? Like your per dollar amount that you're getting is just is way better.
Oh yeah, And I can tell you anecdotally, like I really love the condo location we have here, but now that I've been stuck inside a little more this year, I'm like, oh man, it would be nice to have, yard, basement, a few more bedrooms, right? So maybe when the trade-off of walkability for personal space, if we're going to be more like home-based creatures living and working, kind of going forward, right?
I wonder if we're going to see a lot more acreage sales or something then too.
Plausibly, I don't know. Acreages were pretty busy this summer, but it also died. Like that's a submarket that kind of dies really hard as soon as the snow flies for whatever reason.
That might be dependent on how close they are to the city and how good the internet is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I was going to say is in the wintertime, you got to see how much snow you have to shovel. Massive driveways.
Exactly.
So screw that. Yeah.
That's a good point.
I read the article and I was kind of annoyed because like when you guys brought up the average housing price is 609,000 in Canada. I mean, cool. Like all it takes is one $20 million sale in Vancouver or Toronto, and that'll jump it up like 5 or 6%. That's why some of these stats are just so dumb. I'd much preferred if they came out and they said, median housing prices in Alberta or median housing prices in BC, where you kind of get like an idea where you don't get like this massive outlier that just balloons everything.
I'm glad we all took statistics 101.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that, because we've had that in Edmonton before where you'll have like, even in past years where, like 2016, 17, where the market was really tanking, but then there would be like one $3 million sale in the summer and it would skew the stats for that month. So yeah, when you have Vancouver, Toronto, you have the potential of those $8, $9, $10 million properties changing hands every once in a while. And that would probably be a significant blip on the radar too. So yeah, as usual, when it comes to housing stat articles on national housing stats on national news websites, it paints it with kind of too broad of strokes, in my opinion, in a lot of ways, and maybe doesn't give a good picture. I mean, it was definitely a busy market this year, but I think it was just kind of because we essentially forced people to do their home shopping in half the time.
Yeah.
Of the market being available, if that makes any kind of sense,
Yeah, super valid point. I think that obviously too, like real estate is so localized that this sort of statistic is it's a moot point, frankly. But
yeah.
Do you guys want to move on to the next one?
Yeah, what's the next one you have up there, Josh?
The next one I have is the one about the office space vacancy. So Edmonton office space vacancy remains flat but healthy, says CBRE report.
I was quite surprised to hear this just as a residential side guy, where I'm surprised it's not like way, because it's been like 18 to 20% for a couple of years, hasn't it? If I'm not wrong, right? Like, I don't know. I thought it would be much, much higher, but I don't know. Maybe you guys commercial guys can attest to why this hasn't changed significantly, or is there a lot of lag time where maybe these companies are slow to give up their spaces, downsize, whatever? Like this is actually probably the most surprising article for today for me, honestly.
I think part of it, I don't know how it's calculated per se, but I think a lot of it is some of these buildings are being taken off the office market completely. And so they're being converted. There's at least a couple properties that have been converted into multifamily. That could be part of the reason why. Out of the universe of vacancy, that does end up getting smaller. But it's actually surprising. There was, I know there's at least 3 projects that are going on right now. Actually, maybe even 4 projects that are going on that are office conversions. So they're converting them into multifamily. And surprising, actually, they're quite nice. The biggest restriction for a lot of these buildings is parking. Not as many of these buildings are outfitted for a residential ratio in parking. And so we do see that become an issue. But I think that's partly one of the reasons. I know Enbridge Tower, they were thinking of doing hotel there, right on, I guess it's 104th Street and Jasper Avenue. I believe they're actually going to go rental there as well. So there's going to be an influx of rental property from this office component. But yeah.
Interesting.
I think that's a major reason why.
Okay. Yeah. Now I can picture a few of them in my head now that you say it. I wouldn't have even thought of that. Interesting.
I think too that when we look at office space, there's going to have to be some creativity. And that's one way to fill a hole in the market, is to change it over to residential. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I can add on what Josh said, I think we'll see some, this is just kind of more random speculation. I think we'll see some interesting stuff with in the future coming years, maybe like more co-working spaces, because they're kind of a very niche product in Edmonton and a touch expensive right now. But perhaps if there's more work from home revolution plus a whole bunch of vacant office space, particularly suburban, we might see people doing creative stuff, maybe more like an Airbnb of commercial to do like pop-up shops or something. If everyone's starting their little home-based business, something like that. I don't know, but it'll be a really interesting one to see. One thing that I've heard that's kind of a problem nationally or whatever is, and you guys would know more than me about this, but the investors who own like industrial and commercial office space, like because the cap rates are so low there, like what's going to happen long term if they're all totally vacant, like what we see mass abandoned warehouse districts and stuff, or what do you guys think there?
All to Amazon.
Yeah, seriously.
That might be a serious option, but I think you're just gonna have to diversify and find unique tenants for these spaces, and or worst case scenario, maybe you're demolishing the property and you're selling it for land value and looking at a different use for that property. I think there's gonna be environmental issues with that though, but yeah, I think you're just gonna have to diversify. So you see a lot of interesting tenants out there for industrial spaces. I've seen everything from, I think it was a bow and arrow type of thing. It's like where you have bow and arrows and you shoot people, essentially, like really strange uses like that. But the terms are much shorter. They're 1 year to 3 years, but it's a way to fill the property and extract some value out of it.
Andrew,
and I also found it very interesting on the office side. There was a massive transaction that recently happened. I think it was to the tune of $100 million. A buyer from out west, from Vancouver, they bought Canadian Western Bank building.
Oh, I heard about that actually.
Yeah, they recently closed on that. So a bit surprising too, actually, a little bit more positivity for the office market, I guess you could say, in that there are investors looking out there for properties like that are maybe not substantially leased out, but at least mostly leased out. Yeah, it was a bit surprising to see a transaction that large in Edmonton at this time, for sure.
Well, I feel like there were a few big sales in the past year, were there not?
Yeah.
Not specifically office, but just big buildings being sold outright.
Oxford.
Yeah, definitely on the multifamily side, there is a ton of portfolios that sold. I know there was 3 concrete high rises. I think it was, you look at multifamily volume this year, it literally made up about 50 to 60% of the volume. I think it was to the tune of 300 million, these 3 buildings. Wow. All downtown. I think it was the Devonshire portfolio is what they call it, but there's a couple other sales like that some of it actually tailed on from last year, but a lot of large sales, like the Mayfair building on 109th Street in Jasper that had sold, a few other projects in the downtown core as well, and in the Oliver and in the Strathcona University areas.
Yeah, like I think going back to some of the the super empty buildings have been targeted towards more of the rental or moving towards more of the rental. So I think that's bang on. Part of it could just be that it takes a while to get out of your lease, right? Like if you signed a 4 floor lease with a company downtown, I mean, who are you going to sublease it to?
Right.
Like,
that's a good point.
There's really not a lot of options. I think properties are really attractive, right? Like the Canadian Western Bank one. If you've got cash and you can get a good deal, go find it. Like we saw oil field companies in, I think it was 2016, 2017 when the crash happened. If they had cash, they were buying assets because it was a great time to buy assets, right? So again, it comes back, if you're an investor, you've got the cash, go find a good building.
Yeah, I think for properties like that, I think they had a good tenant base in there as well. right? I don't believe it was full of oil companies or anything like that. They had a law office in there, maybe even a couple. Canadian Western Bank, I think, takes up a good portion of the floors there as well. So you have good stable tenants in that property, which, in terms of cash flow, and they probably have very long leases in that property as well. And so you're thinking of, good long-term money, makes sense that way, but I guess not every building's like that.
It's true.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, when's next on the list here, Josh?
Let's do the listings skyrocket while leases are up and rents are down, making sense of the complex COVID rental market. This is an interesting one because it was from October 28th. So this is kind of like listings are skyrocketing as we're going into winter. So for me, that was kind of like a duh. But I mean, what's your guys' take on it?
Yeah, and that was, I guess that was mainly, was that across Canada? So I'm just trying to recall the article there.
Yeah, it's the Edmonton Journal article, so it's a little bit more focused on Edmonton, but there's Toronto and stuff in it too. So
it touches on it, yeah.
I think when it comes to the rental rates and whatnot, I think a large part of that, I guess in any market right now, given that rental is a bit more of an attractive asset class, is that there's been a lot of supply added to the market. So I think that takes up a big portion of what that vacancy is. And obviously, when you have more buildings in any area, there's going to be more competition. That's going to drive rental rates down. It's going to be better for the tenant. But I think that's at least what's happened here in Edmonton. I think we had like 1,780 units added to our market at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, in the last couple of years. And I mean, that takes time to absorb. So it was surprising when CMHC actually came out last year with a vacancy rate that was lower than a year prior, yet we added almost 2,000 units. I think it was just a matter of absorption. But it showed that we were a pretty resilient market. But now that there's even more added to the market and things aren't as green and nice in today's market, I think that's what we're experiencing a little bit.
I'm really curious to see, because the article talks about how the shift from short-term rentals to long-term rentals has sort of partially been done because of decrease in tourism, right? So I don't think Edmonton is going to see a big change of this, but I'd be curious to see how in Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, cities that get way more tourism, if they continue this trend from short-term rentals to long-term rentals, are you going to see, hotel rates or Airbnb rates go up once tourism comes back because of demand issues? Or are you going to see just everybody put their house up on Airbnb because they know they can make like a month's rent in a weekend on it, kind of thing?
Yeah, good take. I think that, and I mean, also it mentions that there's like no calls for rental housing to be built because there's such a glut. And I mean, I'm seeing that in Edmonton, even like there's a unit that I'm trying to rent out for a client, and like there's just so much competition in the price bracket that it's insane. Like the inquiries I'd be getting 6 months ago on a unit were in the dozens per day, and now it's like 3 over the last week. So it's an interesting place to be when there's so much competition. And I mean, people are just I think people are obviously, if you have some sort of portfolio, you're trying to make some cash from it at this point. You don't want those units sitting vacant. So
yeah, I think it all kind of goes full circle there. Like a lot of these older properties, I mean, if you think about the type of owners, maybe it's been passed down, they've owned it, they almost have no debt on these properties, these old existing buildings. So they've never done anything to their units. They've never renovated it. They've never done any major improvements. And now you have a brand new purpose-built rental building beside you, plus 2 more down the road, right? And then 5 more planned in the next 2 years. Well, I mean, you're going to have rental competition, so you're lagging behind, right? And so I do believe that there's a flight to quality right now. People don't want to live in that old wood frame building when for not too much more, you can either get into a nicer renovated unit or a brand new unit, right? And so you're going to be faced with that external competition, I think, a lot more. And that's why the reason, we're seeing a bit of a price drop in the overall asset class is that we've seen maybe about a 5 to 10% drop in pricing for multifamily over the last year here. And yeah, it's because, that income and that revenue stream is not nearly as fruitful as it was previously, right? And so one of the hardest things that we have to do to communicate to these people that, your units are maybe just not going to get as much rent as they used to, and that's why your building's priced this way. But yeah,
I'd also be curious to see, because, prior to the pandemic, the whole thing was you live close to where you work, right? I mean, that's what drove downtown rents and properties for the most part, right? And you live downtown, you work downtown. So I'm really curious to see, as we see everybody get, we'll say, out of downtown, what that changes in terms of what are people getting in, rental units and whatnot, especially on, like you're expanding south side kind of areas and markets, right? And how that's going to really affect not only housing prices, but the rental market, right? Like if I'm a young family and I can pay, a same price as I pay for a 2-bedroom condo downtown in Summerside or Ellerslie or Chappelle or Allard, get a really nice house, yard, I don't have to go to work, right? I mean, I feel like we all know the answer to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we've already started to experience that. We talked to a lot of leasing guys out there for new purpose-built rental buildings, and it's been slow. It's been incredibly slow. They're just not getting the rental rates. They haven't been able to fill their properties. I think a great example would be McLaren. I know that they're in McLaren on 124th Street. I know they're still struggling to lease up units. Mm-hmm. I talked to the leasing person who's great at what she does, but she's doing the same thing for the Augustana Tower in that government district there. And that, again, is having some struggles leasing up as well. It's just that population loss in the downtown core. I think it's the main driver of that.
Do you think it might also be product for those buildings too? Because obviously, I've looked at them. The units are shoe boxes. Like they're mm-hmm. tiny units. Do you think that might play into it a little bit too?
Absolutely. I think that there is a bit of a change in the way people want to live. I mean, a lot of these developers are chasing, one major thing, which is the price per square foot. Right. So they want to get closer to that $300 a square foot, or $3 a square foot. And it's, it's tougher for these guys out there to try to reach those numbers, right? They're all a numbers game in there, and when they plan these projects. And so I think that's a large part of what they're chasing, but it's a bit of a lifestyle too. The Hendricks Tower leased up very well at initial release, and they had tiny units, right? And they're 400 or 500 square feet for the smallest 1-bedroom units.
Which tower was that? Sorry,
the Hendricks Tower.
Oh, Hendricks. Oh, yeah.
Gotcha. And so I know that there is demand for that type of product out there, and you're able to obviously increase the density when you have units that small as well. But maybe that's changing right now. It certainly is that we're seeing for the projects that are just completing at this time.
And they also focused on amenities too in those buildings, which are probably just not being used at this point.
Yeah, you have to keep them closed or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're noticing that too, is people are just going based on affordability. So if you have a basic product versus something with all the bells and whistles, it's going to be harder to lease up that the bells and whistles project for sure. People want to chase value, right? People want something basic, a place to live, and I don't need a rooftop patio with a cafe and free bagels. Right, I can make do with a gym, or not even the gym. Right, maybe they don't need anything. They want bare bones. And if that helps them save on their monthly rent, they'll make that choice.
Gotcha.
It seems to be, and we'll come back to this at the end, but there's kind of an overarching theme of this work from home revolution that has kind of been thrust upon us, and we're like halfway through it enough that we can see some impacts, and it appears it will continue to make future ones. So it'll be interesting to kind of come back to this conversation, in like 6-8 months or something like that. But and you can also kind of see how it across sectors, if you will, between houses, renting, apartments, commercial, like it's affecting everywhere, right?
Yeah, I think you're going to see a massive bell curve, right? Because I've got friends who, the moment that it becomes, we'll call it safe or good enough to go back in the office, like their companies have to go back in the office, right? Like I got a buddy who works for a video game developer. They have to go back in the office when this is done, right? Like the amount of productivity and other issues that they've encountered has just cratered them, right? So I think you're going to see, like, everyone is now working from home that can, right? But as, assuming the vaccines are good, they get rolled out and we start seeing, we'll call it a return to normalcy I think we are going to see sort of a rebound effect in some respects, especially for companies that either sort of have to be in the office, or it, in terms of what they do, it just makes more sense.
Right. Yeah, there may be because there are, so something like you just described. I know law offices are another one where they push really hard to be back in person as soon as possible. But then there's a lot of reports out there of companies realizing, 30% of their workforce can work from home, or maybe they don't even need them, right? So, well, I think there will be a very clear split of like return to the core, if you will, versus kind of staying more suburbia work from home, right?
Yeah, there's obviously the question of productivity, and
I seem to hear very conflicting reports on that. Yeah,
most definitely. So
I think a lot of it just has to do with the roles in the industry and the business, right? Like, I can do my role entirely at home. Nothing has changed. Still very effective, right? I have colleagues who work in other areas of the bank, not so much the same story, right? A lot of the sales staff, commercial lenders, those folks, because they've essentially been shuttered at home, are having some issues with it, just because that's the nature of the job, right? The nature of the job is you going out, you meeting clients, and sort of being in areas, right? I'm sure you can speak to that, Brandon, right? Like there's certain things that just you sort of need to be in an office. Now, whether or not that office is downtown or that's on the south side because it's cheaper, or some other place, that's a really good question. But yeah, I think like you're going to see we've all kind of come down this massive curve, and then we're going to go back up it a bit, I think.
Yeah, no, I can agree with that. Yeah, at least I can speak for myself. A guy like myself, I definitely need to be in the office to be productive, but I think it goes far beyond that. We have a lot of services there. We have, places for collaboration and working with other people that you wouldn't normally get if you work from home. So I think it's important for a lot of business, especially, at least in the real estate side. It's the reason why I've been in the office, I guess, prior to this week, almost every day. But yeah, you need that face-to-face, client focus, and that's how we get a lot of our communication through and our deals done.
Yeah, I don't think that's going away anytime soon. So it'll be interesting to see. Let's hit on the last article, I guess, here then.
Let's finish it up.
Yeah, because this one is talking about the relief programs and essentially how they're starting to wind down, and how there's forecasting of more bankruptcies to happen. So, I mean, I think in the first wave, we did see a lot of these small businesses, restaurants shuttering their doors and not coming back, but maybe we haven't seen all of it just yet. One thing I'll touch on too is that the interesting thing is that in Alberta, we seem to be the Wild West of being able to still go out and do all these things, whereas a lot of these other provinces right now, they're just nobody's leaving their houses right now. So it's kind of we're kind of almost in our own bubble when it comes to this too.
Yeah, so I mean, this may be a dumb question. When they measure household debt, do they include your mortgage in that?
I usually assume they do, unless the article tells me specifically they don't.
Because I know they say, Canada's household debt is 181% of their disposable income. Oh, but maybe if it's disposable, I'm just thinking where it's like, well, yeah, no shit, your debt might be high, depending on like all data. You can make whatever ratio you want, right? So like a $300K mortgage will be relatively high compared to anyone's monthly income, right? So, anyways, but no, this is interesting because it kind of goes back to the lag time discussion of what will happen long term. Because I have clients asking me, they're like, oh, have there been like just crazy foreclosures? And I'm like, well, no, not really, because first of all, the mortgage deferrals. So, how long did those go on for? Like 4 months, 5 months, right? Like,
no, it was longer.
Yeah, it was more like 6 or something, right? Like, I think
you could get up to 6 months.
Okay, yeah, because that would be something where you wouldn't see the foreclosures that are reactive to that until like several months after they had to start paying again, right? And it sounds like that's kind of the same story here. At least this article is talking about, how CERB and stuff, how it's rolling down. I mean, it's kind of interesting, I think, because things sort of spiked at the start for sort of these insolvencies and stuff, probably just because those were the people most vulnerable or most like very literally paycheck to paycheck, right? And then that's why they got wiped out so quick. And now it's kind of the people who are able to, keep it together. So I don't know. I guess we'll see what ends up happening here and how this affects things long term, right? Anyone have anything?
Yeah, I was going to ask Brandon, are you seeing any sort of foreclosure or stuff on the commercial side when it comes to, people just not being able to hold on to some of these buildings? Or I don't.
Yeah, not so much actually. Yeah, I mean, it's not really been a prevalent issue unless you're just a god awful owner that doesn't know how to manage or run your property. It's incredibly tough to run yourself into the ground. I think, despite the market, especially on the multifamily side, as long as you're able to fill your building with decent tenants, you're going to make out okay. I wouldn't say it's great and awesome for everybody. It's certainly on a case by case basis, very situational, but not a lot of foreclosures or anything unless there's something on the back end or something much deeper on that owner. Maybe their other business is going under, and they're attached to this asset potentially. But no, not really much we're seeing there. And again, maybe that's propped up by potential payments that a lot of the tenants are getting. So I know there's obviously CERB still. Well, I guess that ended, I guess earlier this month potentially. But I know that they're still getting revenue from these guys, and so that's what we're noticing, that a lot of owners in at least B and A class areas of town, they haven't really come down in their values actually at all. And that's been the biggest disconnect. They're essentially unsellable because they haven't seen anything different in their revenue just yet. So maybe that changes in the next 6 months. But yeah, if we're on the multifamily side, unless you have a significantly vacant building, which is hard to come by, you're not seeing a lot of guys in that much hot water.
Yeah, I didn't really think so, to be honest.
Yeah. And there were some mortgage deferrals as well. I know through CMHC. There was some deferrals that people wouldn't have to necessarily pay. I think the guys that we're seeing the most hit from, actually, if anything, is in your secondary and tertiary markets. So if you have product in places that are very cyclical in nature, I have a couple buildings that I sold in Hinton, for example, and a large part of their industry, it comes from lumber, but also oil. And guys go in there for 6 to 8 month stints, and that's the basis of your rental pool. Well, when those guys are not there, yeah, you're going to have a very, very vacant building, incredibly vacant building. I mean, 50% would be awesome, right? If it gives you a bit of a frame of reference. And so, I mean, making your payments in areas like that, I think you're going to have a tough time, and potentially you might have to go into some sort of foreclosure or insolvency situation.
What are you seeing on the banking side of things, Andrew?
I haven't heard a lot. The thing that annoys me about these articles is they say there's an increase of almost 19%. I don't really care about the increase, and I don't really care about how many people are. I want to picture the overall market, which is one of the things that always annoys me with these. But I haven't heard a lot. I think the general assumption a lot of people are assuming will play out is that you'll have CERB started to end, I believe it was end of September. So we're about a month and a half out of CERB. And I would assume that you'd take a 3-month deferral after that if you still had problems. So a lot of people are assuming early next year is when you're going to start to see a lot of the foreclosures. People just simply run out of cash or options. I didn't send it to YouTube, but I sent Josh and Phil an article that stated Canada was the most generous out of all the developed Western nations in terms of their COVID relief, and that household incomes actually rose over this year. So the federal government has kind of put themselves in this pickle of they've been too generous. How do you take people off? And they don't have any more options, right? So if we go back to Econ 101, your two options from a government perspective on spearing the economy is interest rates and then fiscal policy, right? So the problem being is they pumped a ton of money into the market as well as cut interest rates. So they have no other option. They can't cut interest rates further because there's no room to cut, right? Like 1% really to 2%, like you're not going to make a difference there. And they spent $350 billion. So now how do they get themselves out of this mess? Well, they got to spend more money because they have no other options.
UBI coming down the line.
Yeah, until they go broke, right? Like this was always going to be the big problem that everybody started talking about back in April and May was once this program ends, what are you guys going to do? It's not like anything changed. If you still had a mortgage, it's not like your mortgage got paid down or like parts of it got forgiven. It was just a pause, right? So all the developed nations who went through this are having the same problem of going, well, the economy's still not where we think it should have been. People still can't pay their mortgages. The mortgage is still there. What do we do?
I have one buddy who's like he was thinking the sky is going to fall in like September or whatever, exactly right after these programs ended. So I guess it's going to be interesting to see a month or two down the line that maybe the next time we do this, things will be way different again.
Yeah.
So
maybe internet and Zoom won't be a thing and it'll all come crashing down. But I think I do think and this is I want to make sure I articulate this properly. I do think though the people most susceptible to being hit hard by the end of CERB are more on like those who are like laid off or perhaps more of like, let's call it like an economically marginalized group sort of thing. It's not
like
homeowners
in the first place.
Well, that's exactly it. Right. And going back to some of the rent stuff and whatever on these articles, it was saying, no. Right. But basically with, where I'm kind of going with this, it's, all the people buying homes this summer and fall weren't using CERB to buy homes, right? Those were people economically stable enough to do it. Mm-hmm. So we may have it's kind of the marginal homeowners. Perhaps we'll see some people who are like maybe more heavily tied to oil and gas. I don't know how bad that is, but that in CERB, it's kind of, in my opinion, going to be a segment of a market, which is unfortunate. And the overarching theme that's been an issue through this pandemic is like the widening of the wealth gap, if you will, just because it's probably a group who's not a high percentage of homeowners who have this higher debt and are more dependent on these programs and stuff, right? So I actually am curious to see what happens come tax season next year too, where there's a whole bunch of people who it's going to be like, you have to give back a whole bunch of that CERB and stuff too, and the financial strain that may cause for individuals.
Yeah, you didn't qualify for it or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Canada did a good job of it, but it's also going real long term with it. Like they objectively just printed money, right? So we're going to be paying these inflationary costs for the rest of our young lives. We're all about the same age, right? Like well into our adult lives, we'll still see the rolling repercussions of COVID, in my opinion. Yeah. Well, I think that was a pretty interesting conversation today. I'm glad you two are here. You guys have some better in-depth insights into the financial side of things than us lowly residential filters. But so let's try and come back to this in maybe 6 months or so. But does anyone should we all end up with predictions for the next first half of next year kind of thing?
Let's do that. That's a good idea.
Anyone want to take it away?
Dibs out.
I know, I kind of just echo my statement from the beginning. I think things at least on my end of the spectrum, on the multifamily side, it seems like it's heading in the right direction. I think once, I guess, a large part of my industry is being driven by low interest rates right now, and it's a great investment environment due to the depressed values out there and some buildings struggling. And, obviously there are still buyers out there, and I think that number only increases going forward. And I think I'm hoping that we're out in the clear out of this whole situation sooner than later. And I think once we do, that investor confidence comes back, and obviously people are, eventually going to be coming back to school. And with this immigration news that we had here recently, I think there's bright future for multifamily and my end of the business.
Cool. Any thoughts on office space?
More conversions, maybe.
Okay. Fair enough.
Andrew?
I think you guys are going to have another record year next year. Because if
Yeah.
you think about it, the economy is going to pick up next year for a lot of reasons. Interest rates are still going to be super low, right? Regardless of how fast that economy picks up. Like you really don't only raise it, 25 basis points a year, right? So I think you guys are going to have another record summer in residential as people get a little more confident in terms of consumer confidence and buying, a little more stable in terms of their income. And they once again see record low interest rates, and they're like, yep, let's go buy kind of thing. I think Brandon's bang on. I think you're going to see some smart investors make some really good buys and then figure out what they want to do with them, especially in these worldly markets. So like outside of Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, especially if they can get some of the immigration going. The big thing with demographics is Canada still has a super low birth rate. So like last year, without immigration, I think they said it was something stupidly low, like 78,000 people were born in Canada.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So if they're going to, if they want to bring in 400,000, that's definitely going to help a lot of it. Or you use more, but that's a political call. But yeah, those would be my two bets.
I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good call, in that there's probably some people that were, suppressed buyers even this year that we're going to see opening up into next year. And like you said about interest rates, you can't really push them out. So I'm pretty sure they're going to be around that 2%, that 1.9 to 2.1% interest rate going forward for at least the foreseeable future. Residential side, obviously we hope that it's going to be another record year, but it'll be interesting to see how these vaccines play out, how things go back to, if things actually go back to some sort of normalcy by, summer of next year, what sort of influx we're going to see on that. The commercial side of things, I'm just going to take a shot in the dark, but I think that there's always potential, right? So there's, like we were saying, the creativity. There's going to be people that are buying these things and doing things that we've never even thought about. And there's going to be some pretty cool stuff that comes up in the next couple of years here because of underutilized space. So, that's probably my prediction. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I'm all for it.
There's a lot of people that are going to get married next year because they put it off this year.
That's true. That's true.
You're gonna have
There's a lot more
record
homes.
year.
Be a lot of weddings going on next year. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really good point, Andrew, that makes me slightly rethink my thoughts on it. But I do think just because the overall economic picture, consumer confidence will be in, assuming things go moderately well at the bare minimum, if not very well, consumer confidence will be so high next year that, I think it'll be almost a slightly artificially inflated thing, where perhaps the baseline economy is like, a slow, steady recovery, which is what they're trying to accomplish and project. But because there's so much like, oh, sweet, we can go outside now, we can do this, it's a good time to buy, blah, 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 like people may rush to the market, right? And I think one thing, I would just say consumer attitudes will be the biggest thing towards that. And then we'll probably see a really huge spike next year of residential sales. And then after that, it might level out to like, I think if you look at like, in 2025, we can look at the sales of like 2018 through whatever year. And like, if you X out 2020, 2021, the rest of it will be kind of a slow but steady increase that you would expect for Canadian housing in a media market kind of thing, right?
My question is just how much are people going to move back into the downtown cores? Forecasting? I don't know. I wouldn't want to make a bet on that one.
Me neither. Well, even like it depends which market we're talking to, right? Because if we're talking Edmonton, like Edmonton has always kind of been detached single family. We see more of these purpose-built rentals. I think those will continue to be popular, but I think we'll see more people lean, especially young people, millennials, leaning more towards houses, like detached houses, especially because I think this is just a thought I had now. Let's say the 25 to 35 demo is probably the highest percent where we're old enough that we're moved out, likely living in like a more central building of some sorts, just young enough to not necessarily be homeowners yet. And then I think this pandemic will probably largely change our perceptions of what we kind of value in our home search criteria, right? Especially because we're such the convenience generation, which was pushing us towards more of the central walkable lifestyle. But perhaps this will actually be a great flip on our generation's home housing preferences, right? And that's for Edmonton, any kind of more medium-sized city, right? Your Vancouver, New York, Toronto, et cetera. I think people will go back in droves eventually. So.
Interesting talk, boys.
Yeah, it was good. We'll need to do one of these sooner, have less of a gap between them.
Once a quarter, maybe.
I think that's what we say, and we never quite do it, but we'll have to try to commit to that more often. So
in the words of Don Mazzetti, new videos every week.
Every when I feel like it.
Yeah,
when I need to pay the rent.
Yeah. All right. Andrew, Brandon, we greatly appreciate you joining us. I think this was a great conversation. Glad to have your guys' insight. We appreciate it. And we'll touch base in a couple months, see how things are looking, whose predictions were most accurate or not.
Thanks,
boys. You guys had me on. Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, guys. Okay.
Take care, guys.
See ya.